The new Wuthering Heights film is being called a love story. And honestly, that tells me that Emerald Fennell has not read the same book as me. Because to me, there's nothing really romantic about Wuthering Heights. It's a gothic novel at its heart. There's a little bit of horror, there's a little bit of thriller. But for me, it's not the romance that's the driving part. And I feel like I need to talk about it. Today, as you can see from the title, we're going to be discussing Wuthering Heights. I know the film's literally just finished at the cinema, but I still feel like there's a lot to be said. And I wanted to get my thoughts together before filming this video. So for me, the ghost at the window is the thing that encapsulates the horror theme of this book the most. Lockwood is having a nightmare where he's rubbing Kathy's ghost child's wrist upon broken glass. That's a horror scene. And it was cut from the film. That scene in itself, that happens in chapter 3 of Wuthering Heights. Lockwood experiences a terrifying encounter where the ghost of Catherine Linton appears at his window during a blizzard. And she's pleading, "Let me in, let me in." This is where he's sleeping in a bed. He's mistaking a fir branch tapping on the window, only for a cold hand to grasp his, and a spirit to claim that they've been waiting for 20 years. There are some key details of this passage which I think really demonstrates where this is more gothic horror, and it's not as romantic as everybody seems to think. So the occurrence in itself, Lockwood is trying to break a tapping branch. He feels a child's cold hand grab his and pull it against that broken glass, which causes it to bleed. The ghost's words, "Let me in, let me in." Classic ghost wailing, and the ghost identifies themselves as Catherine Linton. Lockwood is terrified and he's using the broken glass to try and free himself by rubbing this child's hand across this broken glass. When Lockwood tells Heathcliff about this apparent ghost, he's first of all a little bit enraged, but then he rushes to the window, opens it up and starts pleading for Catherine to return. This is supposedly where the cabinet bed is, where those diaries are hidden from Catherine Linton, and the diaries talk about her relationship with Heathcliff. This passage in itself is so pivotal in establishing the tone of the novel as a more of a gothic horror than of a love story. The next thing I want to talk about are how Heathcliff in no way is a romantic hero in this book. Anybody that thinks he is clearly not reading the book very well. Heathcliff is driven by this obsessive, toxic and vengeful cruelty. It's not noble love. It's an obsession into a toxic level. He has this sadistic treatment of other people, which includes his wife Isabella and Linton. To me, that demonstrates that he is not a traditional hero. He has none of those qualities, and he's aiming for that destroy rather than the protect. If we look at Heathcliff's cruelty and abuse, he's actively sadistic. He states that he yearns to crush out the entrails of those he dislikes, making him more of a monster in my eyes than a hero. When we're talking about vengeance versus love, his actions are driven by wounded pride and this desire for revenge. There is no romantic devotion. His toxic obsession, his passion for Catherine is so destructive. It consumes everything, literally everything around him, and it doesn't build a nurturing relationship. They do not have a nurturing relationship. And he has a really abusive relationship with Isabella. It's this calculated move that he makes to seize power. It's not a romantic partnership. I know a lot of people interpret Heathcliff as this bad boy figure, but to me, that the book does not demonstrate that for Heathcliff. He's like this dark force that's warped and that destroys the lives of two families. It makes him like an anti-hero, probably even a villain, definitely not a romantic lead. The next thing that I think the book does really well with leaning into that gothic horror is the Moors. And I think it's something that the film did not capture. The Moors are a character in themselves when it comes to Wuthering Heights. They're supposed to be this living and breathing character. It's wild and untamed, and it's supposed to mirror that intense emotion that is throughout the entire book. But the landscape itself acts as like a boundaryless place. It has no rules. It's untamed. It's free. It embodies that element, that embodies the idea of freedom. There's a couple of lines from Catherine which I think really portray this. There's one where she says, "I'm sure I should be myself were I once among the heather on those hills. So that shows that freedom that she's feeling. Heaven did not seem to be my home, and I broke my heart with weeping to come back to earth. When we're talking about the active threat and malice of nature, a really good quote is, the whole hillback was once billowy white ocean, the swells and falls not indicating corresponding rises and depressions in the ground. And that's talking about those snowy moors. And then we've got one talking about Penistone Crags, which is bare masses of stone which hardly enough earth in their clefts to nourish a stunted tree. So it's like that bereft, bleak outlook, which the moors really encapsulate. At the heart of Wuthering Heights, one of the key themes is generational trauma. We're following a cycle of childhood abuse and rejection, which is specifically inflicted upon Heathcliff. He is a victim of racial and class-based abuse, and this perpetuates this, and then he perpetuates the suffering on that next generation by weaponizing his trauma. And he meticulously plots on how to ruin the Earnshaw and Linton families because of it. The initial trauma of Heathcliff is when he's adopted by Mr. Earnshaw. He's subjected to the intense torment by Hindley Earnshaw and marginalised due to his status. Again, I think it's something that the film doesn't really cover because Jacob Elordi is not of somebody of colour or race. I think there's been a lot of talk around the whitewashing of the characters, and that I think through that you don't see those race issues which are prevalent in the book. So early on in the book, there's so much unresolved trauma and perceived rejection by Catherine that this really transforms him into this figure of rage and hate. As an adult, Heathcliff then perpetuates the trauma and perpetuates the cycle by becoming the abuser. He treats Hareton, who is Hindley's son, Isabella, his own wife, and Linton, his own son, with such extreme cruelty, which mirrors the abuse that he suffered, thereby continuing the trauma. This cycle, though, of revenge is only broken when young Cathy and Hareton build a relationship built on mutual respect, rather than abuse. So the novel really portrays this vicious cycle of trauma where the characters aren't just identified by their own actions, but by their inherited trauma. So now we've talked a little bit around why I see this as like this Gothic horror novel. Let's talk about what the film stripped out. Hindley is completely removed. I know there's been a lot of chatter around this because people are pretty livid that Hindley has been removed completely from the plot. He is essential to that abuse cycle. Without him, where's the origin story for Heathcliff's cruelty? It's just not there. The second generation's gone. Catherine and Hareton's story in the books is its resolution. Without it, you kind of lose the point of the book, that the cycle of horror can be broken. Cathy's ghost at the window, this iconic Gothic image, it's not there. Nellie as the unreliable narrator, which is very important. The book's framing device adds layers of this Gothic unease, and it feels like the film just flattens it. The moors as a horror landscape, it feels like it's replaced by like a cosmetics advert. It's just not the same. If you take out the horror, the abuse and the haunting, really what is left of this book? It really is just two pretty people being really intense on a hillside. I think it's important to remember why the Gothic horror element matters here. For a start, Gothic horror was at the time very tied into social commentary. Bronte was writing about class, about power, about what happens when society creates monsters. The horror is kind of the message. Other Gothic works also use horror to say something about humanity. You've got Frankenstein, you've got Rebecca, you've got The Haunting of House Hill. Bronte wasn't writing this as a romance. She was writing about an obsession that destroys everybody that it touches. It feels like the director of the film saw the darkness as an aesthetic and it wasn't meaningful. It felt all vibes, no substance. And I think that echoes what a lot of people have been saying walking out of the cinema and out of this film. Gothic horror isn't just about creepy settings and sad weather. It's a way of telling the truth. It's a way of telling the truth about the darkest parts of humanity. And that's what Wuthering Heights does. So is it worth watching the film? I don't know. If you're going to take it as a standalone film and completely remove the concept of the book, I mean, sure, if that's what you're going for. I mean, it does fail the source material, so you need to remove it from that, I think. If you are into period dramas, haven't read the book, not interested in reading the book, go right ahead. I think it'd be for you. Anyone that does truly love the book for what it is, though, should skip it. I genuinely want to know if any of you have read Wuthering Heights and watched the film as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. If you haven't read it yet, I would say read it before you go and watch the film. You kind of deserve the real thing if you're after a Gothic horror. Really interested in hear your thoughts below on whether or not you think it's a Gothic horror or a romance. So feel free to put some comments down. As always, I will see you next week. Thanks for watching.